Hello and welcome to this edition of the Voices of Southbury, part of a series of conversations sponsored by Heritage Village and the Southbury Historical Society to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Heritage Village in 2017. I'm your host, Ron Dukenski, and today it's my pleasure to welcome Charlotte and Marvin Shapiro, a wonderful dynamic duo who have contributed much to the life of Heritage Village. Having moved here originally in 2001, they're originally from Brooklyn and Queens, but they came here after 42 years in Rockville Center, Long Island. They have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and notably this summer, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Heritage Village, Charlotte and Marv will be celebrating the 70th anniversary of their marriage. That's really quite remarkable. You know, it's amazing that, as I understand it, you met as a young couple, as young adults at a camp on Lake Winnipesaukee. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And the rest is history. 70 years later, that's wonderful. I don't turn 70 myself in terms of an anniversary of my birth until October, so you've got me beat.
Well, we have a lot to go.
Yes, exactly.
We can't believe that it's really going to be 70.
Well, you both look terrific, and you're both still active in village life. We'll certainly want to talk a lot about that during this next little while. Speaking of which, let me ask, how did you happen upon Heritage Village to begin with? What caused you to look into the village?
Oh,
Okay.
I thought,
You started.
all right. We knew about Heritage Village for 20 years before we moved here because of our very, very close friends. It was Laura and Cy Jarmel and Dita and Rhoda Ashley, who had moved here when they retired. But we retired and didn't retire. In other words, retired from our first careers and then went into a second one. Well, so that's why it took us 20 years to get here.
But in answer to your question, while the Jarmels and the Ashleys lived here, we frequently visited them. And often, particularly for New Year's Eve, we'd come up to the village and we'd celebrate with them and with their friends.
Terrific.
And shortly afterwards, Bernie Ross, who was well known in the village and also a friend of ours, moved here.
Okay.
So we had a group of people that we knew and liked and enjoyed, and that was one of the motivations.
A built-in social network. And you had known the Ashleys and the Jarmels from your early days where you all lived in Levittown, New York, is that correct?
Yes.
So you were among the pioneers in Long Island suburbia, moving to Levittown right after the war, yes?
Right.
How about that? And here you are now. That's terrific. You had mentioned, Charlotte, that you had some very interesting work lives before coming to the village, and including the village.
Very fortunate.
I would like, and it also included some midlife career changes for both of you, and I really want to hear more about that. Marvin, could you start us off? Tell us about your work background.
Well, we had a family business. We manufactured bridal gowns, sold throughout the country. It was a father and 3 sons. So I was drawn into it. It was a natural way to go.
Sure.
And I stayed with that business for 30 years. It was a difficult business.
I'm sure. You were right down in the garment district, right?
Yes.
38th and 7th?
So it has its benefits. On the other hand, I wish I had known that I would have an extra 30 years after I left the business, in which case I would have left it before.
Well, what did you end up doing after leaving the business, the bridal business?
Well, I always had a slight technical background and interests, and I decided I wanted to experiment with computers. But I was 57 years old. I was lucky in a way because my son went into the computer business, and I was able to get from him a real, honest-to-goodness computer, and this was 1978.
My goodness.
So I started to learn how to program computers. When I left the family business in 1980, I went back to school to learn some basic programming. And as it worked out, I became a consultant. This is 1980 when small not-for-profit agencies were changing from typewriters to computers. And they were using the computer as a typewriter. And of course, I was able to understand to some degree the benefits of database programming. And that's what I did for 8 or 10 years.
So you help these small not-for-profit agencies make the transition from typewriters into the world of data processing.
To develop databases.
That's incredible.
And address labels and so forth.
Very, very good. And Charlotte, you had a career change too. Where did you start? Where'd you end up?
I had 16 years of very interesting teaching social studies experience. And I loved the kids. They were lots of fun. Things began to change. Marv was leaving his business. I decided to take early retirement and had the good fortune of meeting someone who was very active in the community in Port Washington. And so I wrote a grant proposal to the Unitarian Universalist Society.
Really?
And they were very interested in having some agency work with women who were returning to the workplace and the whole issue of women's equality in the workplace. So I did another 20 years with Women on the Job.
That was the name of the company,
and that was the name of the agency. It was not-for-profit. It was based in Port Washington, and Lillian McCormick and I had marvelous experiences with helping to prevent sexual harassment, equal pay issues, and affirmative action, because when we started, all the elementary school principals were men, except for 2 women out of more than 60 school districts. It was incredible.
Yeah. So you helped see some of that change and shepherd some of that change.
We saw that change, and we also very early on became advocates for the clerical workers in the schools. They invited us to come speak to them, and we were meeting in a school gymnasium, and they said, "We're not women libbers. We want equal pay with the custodians."
So they didn't quite get into the feminist part of it. They just wanted equal pay, and there's certainly every reason to imagine that that was the right thing.
Yeah, when we met with them, we found out that there was more than equal pay. The custodians were given the benefit of cleaning, the financial benefit of cleaning their uniforms. The women had no financial benefit for cleaning their clothes.
Can you believe?
The men were able to go out and cash their checks on company time.
Wow. Not the
women.
Isn't that something?
So in some ways, all the subtleties that we had never thought about came up.
And how sad it is that that's still an issue today, but you were certainly a pioneer in getting some of those larger issues addressed by society. And now I want you to tell me more also about your interest and your lifelong involvement with the League of Women Voters, would you?
Right. I have to tell you that the League of Women Voters is having its 200th anniversary in 2020.
Getting close.
And they organized immediately after the women got the vote in 1920.
Okay.
So it was a consequence of my experience in Levittown, where I helped to initiate the League of Women Voters, and always felt very strongly about the mission they had, that they were nonpartisan, so that they would have equal access, essentially, to both Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
That they cared about good government. In fact, sometimes members of the League were called do-gooders, bunch of do-gooders, you know. But what we cared about
but
was
it was for the right reasons, for sure.
That people understood government,
right.
understood that their participation, not only as voters, but as citizens, was vital to the issue of democracy.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely wonderful. And you were involved both at the local level, then at the state level in New York State. Am I
yes,
right?
And then when I came here to Heritage Village, I discovered that the League had been very active and very good, but that it needed to be reinvigorating because it had sort of become dormant. And with the help of my good friends, Laura Jarmel and Rhoda Ashley,
yep.
we reinvigorated the
you.
League, and we even had some men to help us.
Terrific.
Which was wonderful, right.
And Marvin, as I understand it, you had some involvement with Charlotte very early on in the League when you lived on Long Island. Am I right that there's an interesting story you tell about having been chauffeur to someone who was a speaker at one point? Who was that? Tell us about that.
Well, Mrs. Roosevelt was invited to give a speech in Levittown. And because I had recently purchased a brand new Ford station wagon, I had the most presentable vehicle in which to transport her. She lived in Greenwich Village, and it was my honor to pick her up and bring her to the way out to Levittown, Long Island.
That is quite an honor indeed.
Yeah, I regret that I did not at the time realize how my mother would have enjoyed having a seat in that car at that time.
I can imagine.
I felt obligated to invite anybody from the League. It was their affair.
Right, right.
And I had enough of an honor driving her. That's how I felt before. But since then, I have always regretted that I deprived my mother of the biggest thrill she ever would have had.
My.
So that was that story.
I got it, yeah. Well, at least you had the honor, and that was pretty special. Now, tell me about, after you came to the village, you have certainly been involved in lots of different activities. Marvin, why don't you start us off? Tell us what activities you got yourselves involved in the village.
Well, I was really gung-ho. I got myself a garden plot right away, as everybody else is doing.
Right.
I never realized how much work it would be. I naturally joined the computer club.
Naturally, yeah.
And shortly afterwards, Focus became important.
Good. Focus is the television series, right?
Yes.
That you've both been involved in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. How did you both come? I'll turn to you, Charlotte, to start this answer. How did you become involved in Focus? And tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, I became involved in Focus much later in our lives in Heritage Village. Essentially, we've been in the village for 16 years.
Right.
And it wasn't until about 3 years ago that it seemed to me, because of all the very interesting people in Heritage Village, that it would be nice to do an interview program. There had been one years ago, but then it sort of ended. And I must say that in the more than 2 years of the Discovery interviews, we found, Marsha Brooker and I found that it was so fascinating to find out about the backgrounds of these people, what they were doing in the village. Many of them were leaders in their respective organizations. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's kind of unbelievable that we have more than 100 organizations and clubs in the village, so that anyone coming into the village can find a nest, someplace where they can meet people
right.
with common interests.
Right.
And then they become good friends.
Yeah,
and they walk around the ponds with or without dogs, and they see each other, and there's a tremendous camaraderie.
And spirit.
Camaraderie,
I'd like to inject one thought.
Please, yes.
That in order for this to happen, you need 3,000-4,000 people. It doesn't work with 300 people.
Got it, yeah.
So one of the most important characteristics of the village is the size. Location is another, but size is terribly important.
Critical mass, huh? You had enough critical mass to be able to draw on a variety of things. So you've been involved, and you mentioned Discovery, which is a part of the Focus series that includes having neighbors get to know each other on video.
Right.
And you have been involved in camera work and production work also for Focus, Marvin?
Yeah, I'm very proud of some of the things I've done. One was the history of the village, which I made a 45-minute video taking advantage of some of the clips that I found and the skills of other people in the village that contributed.
Yeah.
But it is a history of the village from the very beginning.
My.
I also documented the building of the fitness center, which I think was a great change, an innovation.
Tremendous addition,
It meant the difference between the old and the new, between looking backward and looking forward.
So, turning point in village life, I
guess. Because I was interested in computers, I made several videos on how to do things.
Very good.
And then I've always had a great appreciation or fascination or a bewilderment of what is happening out there. And I approached it not as a knowledgeable person, but as an object of fascination.
Well, you have made almost a third career out of your writings, and I want to pursue that with you because you are a great observer.